In 2010, a phenomenon washed over schools as silly bands rose to popularity. It seemed like every kid in my school had wrist full of them, trading and collecting whenever they could in order to try to get the rare geckos one. um, and my school wasn't the only one. Silly bands were so popular during this time that sellers and distributors were having trouble even keeping up with the demand. And as I began researching more into this topic, trying to figure out why they became so popular and what made them inevitably fail and not be so popular anymore, I realized that there's a pretty bigger story that should be talked about underneath everything. But we will get you. We'll get to that later. We'll get to that later. I just want to talk more about the creator and the actual product. This is Robert. He is the CEO of BCP, otherwise known as Brainchild Products. Through this company, he created and founded Silly Bands. After an hour of researching Croak, I wasn't able to find much on him. I was able to find his website. I was able to find the Silly Band's website. They both had a biography for him. They were copy and pasted. Luckily though, I was able to find a Bloomberg article that gave me a little bit more insight on him. So Croak grew up in a lower class family with his parents before they separated. He grew up in Toledo, Ohio, which is where his company BCP is now. Croak has a marketing degree through Owens Community College and has owned quite a few different types of businesses, from bars to restaurants to advertising companies or promotion companies. But Robert, from early 20s, has always wanted to be an entrepreneur. But honestly, none of the things that he tried to sell were selling. And he never really gave up. He took over his grandparents' restaurant after his grandma died and made it into a really nice club. Sadly, some controversies happened, and Croak ended up getting sentenced to probation after signing a check that wasn't his. So he got for forgery, and thankfully he didn't get any kind of jail time or anything like that. But he did get probation, and he couldn't own bars anymore because of probation. That was a big hit for him, but he said that he wasn't going to worry about it and that he was just going to focus on bigger things. So he's a very optimistic guy, it seems. Another controversy that happened was when he was working on a project with the city to build a theater for Toledo. He's done a lot of good for Toledo. He must really love his city. The city council and the mayor were starting to fight over the contracts for the project, so Robert opted out of helping. But he was supposed to help book concerts for the theater. Another controversy that Robert found himself in was when he had to pay $45,000 of taxes, and he found himself not able to. He made a statement about it to Bloomberg and said that, sometimes, and I'm paraphrasing here, but sometimes shit happens, He told Bloomberg that he was able to pay him off and keep them paid off. In 2008, Robert Croak creates Silly Bandz. Robert said that he got the idea of Silly Bandz from a Chinese product show that he went to on a business trip. Silly Bandz didn't start to cause traction until 2009, thanks to the first brick and mortar shop that was selling them, called Learning Express. These bracelets slowly began to rise in popularity from southern USA all the way to the eastern states. By 2010, Croaks bracelets would be sold in over 8,000 stores nationwide. The phenomenon of silly bands, however, wouldn't reach maximum popularity until popular celebrities like Shakira and Sarah Jessica Parker would be seen wearing them. After that, it was no stopping this fire. It was everywhere. Ellen DeGeneres even put them on her show. It was insane. Uh, they were the biggest trend for a long time, for 2.5 years, maybe even more, resulting in thousands and thousands of YouTube videos and posts to circulate throughout the internet at this time. There was even an amazingly edited rap video of silly bands. I'll put in a little clip here.
Everyone knows that a real thug is silly. How many bands? I got like a million. Silly, silly, silly bands sweeping all around the land. Silly, silly, silly bands, you put them around your hand.
If you would like to check out the rest of the rap, I will put the link down in the description. Silly bands also started to get more and more unique the more and more popular they became. So, for example, some silly bands had glitter, some glowed in the dark, some were tie-dye, and the coolest, in my opinion, were the UV activated silicone rubber bands that whenever you like heated it up or whenever you were holding it, it would turn different colors. Croak was able to partner with a bunch of different celebrities and companies in order to make special themed packs. For example, some of these themed packs were Angry Birds, Justin Bieber, Sanrio, like Hello Kitty, and yes, even the Kim Kardashian pack. But as you can tell, they did make quite a lot of different packs. They made iCarly, Marvel, Halloween ones that glowed. They had the UV activated ones that I was talking about. But, like I was telling you, the popularity of silly bands allowed Croak to further the brand as well. He was able to make silly earrings, silly slaps. He was able to make band-aid rings, key rings, necklaces, and the most ludicrous of all, in my opinion, is the Nintendo DS game and iPhone game. The Silly Band DS game was launched in 2010. You could collect over 200 different types of silly bands by playing an Angry Game ripoff of an Angry Bird ripoff, as you can tell from here. The whole goal of the game was to break down the structures in order to save the trapped silly bands inside. There was a trailer that came out for it, and in my opinion, the production is shoddy and boring. But if you'd like to watch it, you can. The link will be down in the bio description. However, not everything about Silly Bands was all sunshine and rainbows, sadly. These rubber band bracelets were actually quite troublesome and controversial when it came to schools. A lot of schools tried to ban or did ban them. Croak actually talked about this in an interview with Times and said they're getting banned because kids play with them so much. But even so, he insisted that silly bands were good and beneficial to children because they can learn with them. I don't know how that makes sense because they are just shaped rubber bands. The closest thing that I probably learned with them was how quickly I could shoot someone with them. And sometimes when children trade, they get what's known as buyer's remorse, and they get upset and regret the decision. What happens after that is they fight. They were also very distracting. A lot of kids were found playing with them or fussing with them. The weirdest part, in my opinion, is they would sometimes get flung and lost. And there were several schools that came forward and said that sometimes lost silly bands would end up in their pool's filter and would therefore break the pool filter. That's insane. A lot of the controversy came from parents as well. On August 5th, 2010, a young child, about preschool age, who lived in New York, I don't really want to disclose his name, had over 60 silly bands wrapped around his tiny little baby arm. He went to his father and told him that his wrist was hurting. So his father started peeling off the silly bands, right, to look at his wrist. And Jason Steele, the father, what saw just it just shocked him. The silly bands were wrapping so tight around his wrist that there were deep lacerations and blood caused by these rubber bands and the pressure that just layer after layer after layer was causing. And Jason's told the doctors that he actually had to pick a few out of his skin because they were just that deep in it. Before I go on any further, I do want to tell you that I will be showing the picture in a few minutes. And that if you want to skip, you can. Here will be the time, and I will see you there. Jason Steele was not the only parent to have to peel off their kids' bracelets or clean wounds from silly bands. A lot of children don't understand the dangers of cutting off your circulation and of the pressure and of the wounds that can be caused by them. But I will be showing the picture now, so if you don't want to see it, then skip to here. So this is what happened to Jason Steele's son, and what happened to, sadly, a lot of other kids too because of silly bands. Remember me telling you how Krook went to a Chinese product show and got inspiration off of one of those products? TD Monthly, a newsletter from Toy Directory, it's like a website for toys, questioned Krook on his rubber bands that looked oddly identical to another brand of rubber bands that had been around for almost 5 years before his. And Robert, and I quote, said, "I'm not familiar with who Passkey Design is. Passkey Design is the original creator of animal-shaped rubber bands." He said that he knew that an animal rubber band product existed before his own, but argued that that product was used for offices and his was supposed to be worn. So his is fashion and not an office supply. However, most rubber bands, in my opinion, I got small wrist, but most rubber bands can be worn unless you get like super small ones or super big ones. So like does it really matter? It's all just rubber bands. However, on the Silly Band's website, it states, "Silly Band fans always want to know how Robert came up with his multi-million-dollar idea. It all began when he visited a product show in China where he was presented a very poorly shaped animal rubber band by a Japanese designer. Robert looked at the oddly shaped rubber band in his hand and tried to see how the vague outline was actually intended to be a dog. The Japanese seller told Robert his rubber bands were to be sold as an office supply product, although Robert felt that it would never sell as a novelty rubber band for adults. This very moment was the match that lit the fire of an incredible idea. With wild entrepreneur instinct, Robert took the product back to his office in Toledo, Ohio, and pitched the idea of making them into silicone children's bracelets. Focus. um, Adding artistic detail and calling them silly bands. Now I have a lot of problems with this. I'm a very opinionated person, and man, do I got opinions. It's just a lot. The Silly Bandz website, it might not have been Robert who wrote this, so I don't want to assume it was. So whoever wrote this is making it seem like Croak came up with his idea. It literally says, Silly Band fans always want to know how Robert came up with his idea. And then they describe how he came up with his idea. But he didn't come up with his idea. He stole it. And I began researching more into Passkey Designs and the original creator of Rubber Band Animal. I know that Animal Rubber Bands was a saturated market to begin with, and that there were multiple brands trying to sell the same animal-shaped rubber bands. But I just think it's a little messed up that Robert tries to play it off that he made the idea up all on his own, and that he was only inspired by Passkey Designs. In reality, he blatantly stole their design. He could have made different designs for his rubber bands. He could have had the cat sit. He could have had the dog have floppy ears or a fluffy tail or even just a tongue sticking out. He made a cowboy. So why couldn't he add a little artistic detail? Because he didn't. Let me show you. He put on his original Silly Bandz website, "We are your only original source for silly bands. Don't be fooled by imitators." When in reality, he himself is an imitator. The spokesperson for Eastern Accent International, otherwise known as Passkey Designs, said, and I quote, "Ours are the original animal rubber bands. The color and the shapes are exactly the same as the Eastern Accent." When she's talking about the color and the shape, she's talking about every brand, not just Silly Bandz. And it's true. Right here is the Passkey animal rubber bands. Over this side is the Silly Bandz. They're identical. There was no adding detail. You just changed the color. The pig's belly bends in the same way on each picture. The cat's back leg bends in the same picture. In the same way, like the tails bend in the same way, the heads have the same little tiny lump. And so does the dogs. Like, the design's the same. And he said that he added artistic detail, but where? The Japanese designers who presented the original animal rubber bands, these ones right over there, distributed to America under the company name of Eastern Accent International, but I'll just be referring to them as Passkey Designs because it's easier for me to remember. Their names are Yumiko Ohashi and Masanar Hanada. Passkey came up with the animal-shaped designs back in 2002, 2003 in New York Magazine, not New York Times, but New York Magazine. Passkeys rubber bands were labeled best bet and were described as effective as their more ordinary brethren. They can be worn as bracelets on very small wrists, meaning they were used as bracelets as well. They were also awarded Best Design at the Japanese National Competition in 2003. A little fun fact, and which I think is very interesting and just goes to prove that they are not poorly made, is that the year before, in 2002, the Toyota Prius won the national Japanese competition. The next year, rubber bands won. I think that's very funny. In 2005, they were told by a manager of one of their stores in America that their popularity would rival that of Beanie Babies. And strangely enough, it could just be a coincidence, a little coincidink. But in 2009, Croak tried to say that he wanted to one day become as good as Beanie Babies with Silly Bandz. I just think it's kind of strange how they were both Beanie Babies. I don't know. Beanie Babies kind of freak me out. That's not the point. TD Monkey was even able to find product reviews of Passkeys rubber bands being reviewed with pictures of them using them as bracelets instead of what they were actually for back in 2008, before anybody even really wore Silly Bandz. They were not cheaply made. They came in nice, cute little packets whenever they were the 24 ones, and then they came in these little tiny packets when you bought the smaller sizes. And people were shown wearing them, so they can fit wrists, unlike what Robert Croak once said. Passkey Designs are still designing and pushing out new products. They now go by Plus D, but it's really cool. I don't know what half this stuff is, but I do know what this is, and that's really cool. And like this, it's a piggy bank. An oin coin. But yeah, I will put this website down in the description as well. Here are the wide animal rubber bands that they came out with. That's all that I have for you. I just wanted to share a little bit of nostalgia with you, maybe give you some of the history that you wouldn't know about. After my research, I came to realize that Silly Bandz rose to popularity because, well, kids. In one of the articles I read, someone said that it's usually the smallest and strangest item that a kid will pick up and just love. And back in 2010, those were oddly shaped and oddly colored rubber band bracelets. And the reason why they just fell out was because, well, when you rely on kids for your popularity, they end up finding something new. Kids do not have a very long attention span, and I'm surprised they lasted even 2.5 years. I will be logging off for the day, guys. I will see you in the next video. Kitsune out.